So guys, I'd just like to briefly add a few more words to the previous topic. This will really be quick. We talked about the ether, about how it's a memory area, and Andre stores information there, and he also processes it. So when all this information comes together, the final frame, the image we're seeing now, is produced by Varen, in theory. That should be enough for us because Unreal has already processed everything internally and rendered it. Now, I'd like to make things easier for us to understand in the future. We'll come back to this topic when we get there, but for now, let's divide all these materials and their areas of application into three categories or three stages. First of all, as I already mentioned, Unreal takes all the objects in the scene that are present here and refers to each one individually for simplicity's sake. So here we have three primitives, a cube, a sphere, and a plane, three different objects. And for example, we also have light. Here, for instance, two lights are combined. At the rendering stage, it applies to one. At the first stage, Unreal asks each object about its color, its radius, and so on, whatever properties it has. That is, in order to display and render the frame correctly, it refers to each object. For each object, this information is added to its memory area accordingly. Here is a light, here is a light, and here there is a lot of light. All these are light sources. All this light is combined together into one group and subsequently sent to its own specific buffer. And here it's important to understand that each object can have its own different radius, different color, and so on. So at this stage, Unreal goes through each object, reads its information, and tries to display it correctly. If we go back to our example with the artist, for instance, we can say the following. He is already mentally thinking about which object is close, which is far, which has a larger radius, which has a smaller one, and so on. In other words, he is already, at this stage, thoughtfully considering each individual object separately. Then, when all these object buffers have been processed and the renderer already has all the necessary information ready, it is then passed on to post-processing. Again, as we've already touched on this topic a bit earlier, it should be somewhat familiar. Post-processing works with the final frame. When Unreal has given us this final frame, this image, everything has been processed, everything has been given to you. The task of post-processing is like a chef, to take this picture, throw it in and process it, to make some kind of correction here. Maybe make it black and white, add contrast, brightness, darken it, and so on. So these are general adjustments. At the post-processing stage, the post-process itself can't access individual objects. It can't say, for example, this lamp don't be red, be, I don't know, green instead. It can say, for example, all objects or all lighting, or even all shades of red change to some other color. So at this stage, it can only refer to things globally across the entire scene at this point. Let's look at an example together to see exactly what I'm talking about in more detail. Interestingly, we uncheck the box here, and as an example, here's what happened. So what can we do? Maybe we can express it as change. And now the shade will change and become cooler. It could become something horror-like or, on the contrary, not hellish, I don't know, anything really, something warm and comforting, and so on. So now we can take the final image and process it, but we can't refer to specific things, like specific objects in the scene, such as a chair, a table, or a decorative item, or a particular light source, for example, sunlight coming through a window or a lamp in the corner, and so on. And finally, compared to Photoshop, post-process has additional features that we can enable, such as advanced adjustment tools and unique filters, which allow us to operate and interact with our projects in more flexible and creative ways. We'll talk about all of this in the practical part when we get to post-process materials, when we start creating them. To put it simply, and so as not to overload you with too much information about buffers, what this means is that Unreal has already processed this information and stores it somewhere internally. So, the post-process can access these buffers and read some of the information from them, and you can also tag certain objects in the scene, which means that specific materials or effects are either applied or not applied to those particular objects, for example, depending on your specific needs or requirements. But again, we'll talk about this in more detail and depth later. Right now, I wanted to say that post-processing is basically the same as Photoshop, but it is actually a bit more advanced, mainly because it can reference or even request some additional information from the first category, that is, from the buffers. Then, after all this information has been carefully processed in the post-process stage, the very last step is overlaying the user interface. Like, as I already mentioned, all these buttons, pop-ups, and so on that we see on the screen. They're not connected to all of this at all. They simply take the final image. They don't process anything and they don't calculate anything there. They don't render, don't do anything, just overlay on top. So honestly, this really isn't worth your attention at all. Don't worry or get hung up on it. It's a completely separate topic, okay? So we get our first category, objects in the scene that interact with each other. It's real, and all of this is calculated, assembled, and rendered by the renderer. Then this information in a certain format is sent to post-processing. There, it performs the final, so to speak, correction of the image, including color correction and similar adjustments, and so on. And after that, the user interface is then overlaid on top of the post-processing. So there are three categories.